have a favorite minor prophet. I think the favorite one I have is the one I'm preaching that week. So I'm so fascinated by the minor prophets, and I love getting into them. I've challenged us to get into them. I was talking with Larry at the Friday night gathering, and he was saying he's really liking the minor prophets because he's so, yeah, it's kind of like you say, we've never really done that. Don't know a lot about them, so it's kind of like a great journey, and I have enjoyed that also. I've enjoyed it because I actually believe that there are messages in the minor prophets that speak to us today. These are God's major voices in a world that's facing major ruin and challenge. And significant as it goes through. I also love it that we're kind of learning more about it. I kind of fantasize what it'll be like someday in heaven, and honest, I know it's going to be different than how I could manage it to be. But just what it would be like when you meet Obadiah. And, and he had that one chapter, that one whole chapter in that book about Edom and all that was there, and the ability to say, yeah, I know your book. So we're in there. Well, this morning we were going to another minor prophet. And today we're going to pick up one that is Micah. And we're going to talk about Micah, and we're going to unpack it. And the music that I've picked out today for worship team had a lot to do with Micah, and you'll understand that more as we get into it. But first, let me kind of set the groundwork. To understand Micah, you kind of need to think about Christmas in July. All right? That's what you need to think about is Christmas in July. And actually right now, Christmas in July things are taking place. I know that Port St. Lucie has got one coming up here at the end of July. They've got a big one. Santa Claus is going to be there. He'll be doing all sorts of things. It's a Gulfview Square. It's in a couple... I'm not advertising for them, but I happen to see it on the line because this whole Christmas in July thing is on there. For many of us, Christmas is this thing that we only think about in December. And for most of us, the only time we have ever heard something referenced from the book of Micah is in the month of December because someone sent us a Christmas card and a verse from Micah is included in it. And while it's there. So today what I want us to do is to just, here's this minor prophet that for good reason is often associated with the first advent of our Savior, of Jesus coming. And I kind of want to unpack it. So it's our kind of own version of Christmas in July, except it's here. I want to unpack the story of Micah. And we'll go there and we'll look at it. That was actually, I stole a picture from a Christmas card last year. Why Christmas? Why this whole thing? Well, first of all, let me give you the key word. It's up there already, and this will help you. A lot of times you'll get a Christmas card. Anybody ever get a Christmas card and they talk about, a quote like the Prince of Peace? It's Micah that talks about the Prince of Peace. It's where that comes from. And he will talk about that. But Micah is not simply talking about the Prince of Peace. He is going to talk about some really difficult, challenging things in there. Now, Micah is a career prophet. We talked about that with Jonah last week. Jonah was a career prophet. That whole thing, the stories that take place that lead to his running and everything that's there, he'd been a prophet for a long period of time. Micah can top that. Micah is prophet in the southern kingdom for the kings of Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah. Under Hezekiah, the kingdom's going to make a real turn. The southern kingdom, I told you the northern kingdom, once the kingdoms divide after Saul, David, and Solomon, the northern kingdom, it's a pretty quick 200 years and it's straight down. It gets worse and worse and worse and worse. The southern kingdom, called Judah, just 2 tribes, they will have an up and down journey. And one of those really, really down points was Ahaz. He's as wicked as it comes. Horrible king. The country's in a terrible place. They've now adopted every idolatry you can possibly imagine. This is during Micah's time. He finally passes, and then Hezekiah becomes king. And I don't know, that'd be kind of discouraging. Sometimes, when new president gets elected, we just don't know what it's going to be like. And is this going to be better? Is it going to be worse? We wonder about those things. And I can imagine that Micah is greatly concerned about what it's going to be like because Ahaz has reigned for a long period of time and the kingdom is in a shambles. And Hezekiah assumes the throne. And Hezekiah is a righteous man. And because of Hezekiah, he will move the kingdom back closer to God, and God will stay his hand for a while, the judgment that's coming. So you can imagine that during those years when it got really, really, really bad, that Ahaz's messages that God was having him speak might not have been real positive. So under Ahaz, some of the messages that he would pour out, that God would have him speak, are messages of great judgment, great condemnation. And I want you to see that as we kind of unpack this today. In essence, you could look at Micah's message with a number of different themes, but the first one is this. One of the most common messages in the book of Micah is that, look, trial, it's going to come. It's not trial like hardship. It's like court date trial is going to come. Court date trial. If you look with me in Micah chapter 1, verses 2 and 3, you'll see some things. It says this, hear you peoples, all of you, pay attention, O earth, and all that's in it. And let Lord God be a witness against you. Ooh, what's that sound like? Not too long ago, I'd been subpoenaed to court in a court case, and I was called to the stand, and now I'm a witness. And you stand there, and I got to declare the whole truth that's going on. And witnesses are called on both sides. Some are called in defense, and some are called to accuse, in accusation. And this is the picture that Micah paints. It has gotten so bad that God himself is now going to be a witness against him. Verse 3, the Lord is coming out of his place, and he will come down, tread upon the high places of the earth. The mountains will melt under him. The valleys split open like wax before the fire, like waters poured down a steep place. This is going to happen. This is what Micah preaches, and it's one of the messages that you could imagine messages like that occurring over and over. Now, the book of Micah is only 7 chapters long. So, some people go, did God just dictate that? That's like one message? Now, I imagine it's more like this. It's a lot like what Jesus did during the first 2.5 years of his ministry. He preached some of the same messages and did some of the same things over and over and over again. Sometimes we don't read it that way. For instance, we will often refer to an early portion of the Gospel of Matthew as the Sermon on the Mount. It took place, according to Matthew, on a mountain. Jesus was on the mountain, preached to the people there. Did you know that in the book of Luke, it's the Sermon on the Plain by the Sea of Galilee. And it's in a flat spot. Jesus preaches almost all the same messages. Why? Because the same messages got repeated over and over until the people finally get it. Oh, you get this thing. So the book of Micah, when it finally gets written down by him, it is almost like a summation of a lot of what he's had to preach and to teach and do over that long ministry career. Now, why has he had to do that? Well, he's had to do it. In verse 5 literally says it. All this because of Jacob's transgression and the sins of the people of Israel. What is Jacob's transgression? Is it not Samaria? What is Judah's high place? Is it not Jerusalem? And basically he says, look, it's because of Samaria is the place of idolatry for the northern kingdom. The whole thing happens because of the transgressions of Judah and Israel. It's because of you. Why? Because of you. God's going to come down. He's going to be a witness against you. So it starts with that, but that's not where it ends. Let me explain exactly what the charge is. He only has a problem basically with 2 things. The first one is the broken covenant. Well, I'm going to say 3 things. I could break the first one into 1, but we'll do it 2. The first one is the broken covenant with God. Now, help me out here, you New Testament readers, your gospel readers. Jesus one time said to someone, he says, there's just 2 commandments. The whole law is summed up in 2 commandments. Anybody remember what those are? What's the first one? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. He summed up the first 4 of the 10 commandments with that statement. The covenant that God made with his people through Moses was, I got one thing for you to do. You're going to keep these laws, which are mine. This is the covenant. This is the agreement I make with you. And he detailed them out. And he gave them, well, the first four. The first four, those 10 commandments. You can find them again in the book of Exodus. Actually, I think that's a typo, but that's okay. It's Exodus, but I think that's the wrong chapter. Forgive me. First one, you shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make a false image or an idol. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. The first four are all about our relationship with God. Why is God going to be a witness, testify? Why is God going to judge his people under Micah? Because they have broken this covenant with God. And he says things throughout the book. He says things like this. He's referring to them. All her carved images shall be beaten to pieces. All her wages shall be burned with fire. All her idols laid waste. From the fee of a prostitute she gathered them, and to the fee of a prostitute they shall return. He goes on and on about ways that the kingdom was breaking the relationship with God. Because that's all about. Now, first great commandment, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And God's going to judge the southern kingdom of Judah, and he brings charges against it because you've fallen in love. You're serving, you're loving all sorts of other things. You're not loving me. You're not keeping the covenant that you made with me. So there's that broken covenant with God. But there's more than just 4 commandments that he gave us. The next 6 commandments in the Old Testament correspond to the second commandment that Jesus said sums up the whole law. First commandment was what? What's the second one? And every one of the next 6 commandments are all about how we relate to and treat one another. Everything about that. So it says things like this. There's this broken covenant about loving your neighbor. We're supposed to honor our father and mother. We're not supposed to commit murder. We're not supposed to commit adultery, not steal, not bear false witness. You shall not covet. These are all things that you do against others. All things that get done against other people. And the other side of the charges that are in the first part of the book, this time now in chapter 2, is that this is exactly what they've done. Look how it says this. This is chapter 2, verse 1. Woe to you. Let me back up. There it is. Woe to those who devise wickedness and work evil on their beds. They covet fields, seize them and houses, take them away. They oppress a man in his house, a man in his inheritance, and it's only one example. Throughout the first 2 chapters, Micah keeps pointing out to them how they are breaking the first commandment, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and breaking the second commandment on how they're relating to one another. I love that picture. I mean, they go to bed at night and think about ways they can, rip your neighbor off. Oh, yeah, my neighbor's got this. I'm thinking if we sneak over, tell you what, if you distract them, we could grab this and run. We could do this. We could do these things. We could get away with it. We could get away with it. And that's how he portrays what had happened spiritually, morally, covenantally speaking, in the kingdom at that point. So what's going to happen? So in the book of Micah, there's a big therefore. And the therefore is this: blessing's going to be replaced with disaster. See, the covenant that God made with his people always was supposed to work like this. If you love me and you love your neighbor, if you keep my covenant, these 10 commandments that I'm giving you, you'll be blessed in the land that I give you. You'll be blessed in how you live. You'll experience goodness. What does it mean to be blessed? It doesn't mean that you're rich. It means you experience favor from God. Ooh, to be in the place of favor with God. And I really like that, in the place of favor with God. It's kind of like when you know the person who's seating people at the restaurant and they wave you ahead of a whole bunch of other people. I remember one time I had a friend that was at the movie theater, and he's like taking tickets at the movie theater. And he asked, and I saw me, we hadn't seen this for a long time. And he goes, hey, did you already buy your tickets? Yeah, I did. Okay, well, I can't give you free tickets. I would have otherwise. Go over and he turns to them, hey, give them free popcorn and free sodas. And I'm thinking, that's better than the free tickets. How much this costs? Okay, and you're over there, and you're in a place of favor. You're in a place of favor with God. It doesn't mean that you get everything. It's just in that spot where you know his smile on you. Well, because of what they have done, according to the second chapter, verse 3 and 4, it says this. God says, I am planning disaster against this people, from which you cannot save yourselves. You will no longer walk proudly, for it will be a time of calamity. It's rough. These represent those early messages when the kingdom was, Ahaz is just taking it down, and it's in a terrible spot. But now he's got a second issue he's going to raise up. Micah preached a whole bunch of other messages to a very specific group of people, because it wasn't just that there was a problem with the broken covenant, there was really broken leadership in Israel at this time. And Micah kind of reveals that there's this massive broken leadership that's there. First of all, he paints a picture of rulers that, well, what they are is, hold on, not working. Did it work? Yeah. Way to go. Rulers that have this really twisted, skewed morality. Listen to who he addresses. Listen, you leaders of Jacob. He turns, he's speaking to kings now. He's speaking to the royal court. He's speaking to those in power. Listen, you leaders of Jacob, you rulers of Israel. Should you not embrace justice? You who hate good and love evil? That's twisted. But I mean, we see that in our society today. This is why I often say the minor prophets speak to us. We see reflections of that. We see it's all the time. You see individuals and they appear to, hate good and love evil, and we have all sorts of problems with, drug cartels. The fentanyl crisis just bothers me immensely. So you have one country, China, which sells to the Mexican cartels all the materials that they need to make fentanyl. They make fentanyl, ship it in through secret channels in the United States, and it is the #1 killer of people under the age of 25 today. This last week in the jail, I had to do a death notification with a young mother whose 16-year-old daughter, while she was in jail, died of fentanyl. It's on there. Yet, people selling that in a lot of different places are getting rich. The country and the individuals in that country selling the raw materials to Mexico are getting rich. They love evil. Love evil. Mexican cartels enslaving people, forcing them into labs to make it. Oh, loving evil because it's making me rich. Shipping into the States, the person on the street corner selling it, the person in the neighborhood selling a little bit to a friend. All the ways around. We see all sorts of examples in our country of what happens when God is not attached to people's hearts. It is way too easy to love what is evil. And it goes against that covenant that God made with us. 2 great commandments. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. That's our calling. He preaches throughout his career against the skewed morality of leaders. But it's not just the leaders. He speaks out against the prophets, other prophets, and religious leaders. There's a shock. Man, you'd think they'd been on their side. You'd think he wouldn't be the only voice. Some of the stuff that Judah's doing, you think other people would rise out and cry out against it. But no. Look at what he says. This is verse 11 of chapter 3. Her leaders judge for a bribe. Her priests teach for a price. Her prophets tell fortune for money. The picture is this. if I get rich off it, I'll preach anything that makes your ears tickle. I'll teach anything as long as I get ahead. I'll speak out against only things that make me in a better position. And that's the charge that he brings against the religious leaders of the house of Jacob at that time. And it's just shocking. It's shocking how big it is because there's this ugly, broken leadership that exists there. So he goes on, there's a second big therefore section of the book of Micah. And the second big therefore section is the same thing. Therefore, for these two reasons, because of the broken covenant between God and man, and then between broken leadership, because what was the king supposed to do? Make sure the kingdom is following the covenant. What are the prophets and priests supposed to do? Make sure the people and the king are following the covenants. They're not doing it, so guess what? Blessing, favor will be replaced with disaster. Verse 12 of chapter 3. Therefore, because of you, Zion will be plowed like a field. Jerusalem will become a heap of rubble. The Temple Hill, a mound overgrown with thickets. That's halfway through the book of Micah. And it is just devastatingly bad. It's rough. The picture that he paints is ugly. It's one of doom is coming and you deserve it. It's kind of like that long car ride home. Wait till your dad gets home. Okay, they're on that car ride. Well, wait till judgment comes because it's coming. You are not going to escape it. And it's this really tough picture. Really tough picture. But then it starts to change. And in the middle of the book, Micah begins to preach about a promised Messiah that will yet come. He will preach that this is going to one day change. It's going to change. Now, how many of you loved this movie besides me? I mean, I saw it for the first time in New York City when it first came out. I was sitting in the front row of the movie theater. And everybody remember that big hyper jump and all those lines that shot out like this? I thought I was getting sucked right through the screen. I mean, I thought it was going, whoa, man, that was the coolest thing in the world. Went back to see the movie again the next day. It was going on. The score to that movie was written by John Williams. And it's that powerful, it's amazing music. It's this amazing music. It's heroic and it's epic and you just know something good's going to come of it. And it reappears in all those movies and other movies that he has scored also have that. He's great at portraying this really powerful, romantic, amazing music that just gets you drawn up. Every time I get halfway through the book of Micah and it starts to switch to the promised prince that's going to come, I really want to hear John Williams play because I think it ought to look like this. So bear with me. My geek is coming out. Bear with me. Watch this. Yes! 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 Go Micah, yes! Halfway through the book, that's exactly what he does. He begins to raise this glorious picture that a prince is coming, that a different ruler is going to take place, a different priest, a different high priest, and everything will change because of what he comes to do. He is the first of the glorious passages in the minor prophets that point to this coming forgiver over and over again. And he's part of the reason he is connected to Christmas for us because he points to that. So thank you for letting me get my geek out. I had fun with that. But see, I think that's what it ought to be in there, Yeah, somebody get a Bible and you just press the button and when you turn the page, there it is, That music goes off just like that. I would love to have that. He begins to preach a renewed hope. And the renewed hope is only about this prince that's going to come. That will change everything. And can remember, he's preaching this to people that, for the most part, have only heard judgment. God is coming. God's going to be a witness of you. You're going on trial. And who's going to accuse you? God himself. And it's tough. And in the midst of that, he begins to preach of this promised prince that's coming. The first thing that he shares is that, there is the Messiah's future rule. And if you look, it's right in chapter 4. When I tell you, it's right in the middle of the book. It's exactly set up that way. Everything now turns to the promised prince. Chapter 4, verses 1 to 3. I think I'm reading verse 2 here. Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the temple of God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways, so that we may walk in his paths. This prince is coming. We'll find him. We'll be able to find truth again. We'll be able to find direction again. We'll be able to find what it's like to live a life that is, once again, favored by God. The Messiah's future rule is coming. The Messiah's coming gets foretold in the most specific way in chapter 5, verse 2. Here it is. You've read this on Christmas cards forever. But you, O Bethlehem, Ephrathah, you who are too little to be among the clans of Judah, from you shall come forth for me one who is to be ruler in Israel, whose coming forth is from of old, from ancient days, and he shall be their peace. Go, Micah, let the music play. There it is. He sees it. He has the clearest picture that it's not going to end this way. Yes, judgment's coming. Yes, the kingdom's going to get destroyed, but this isn't it. One who has been foretold from days of old is coming. The Messiah is coming. I just love that picture in the book of Micah. And then he gets really clear about how people are supposed to live in expectation of the Messiah's coming. And he does in chapter 6, verse 8. I love it. It's one of those great passages, one of those key passages. He says this, he has told you, O man, what is good. These are people that can't figure it out. They lay on their bed at night and think of how to rip off their neighbor. and he says, he has told you what is good. This is his expectation. What does the Lord require of you? Do justice, love kindness, walk humbly with your God. Wow. To do justice, to love kindness, to walk humbly with your God. It's the expectation. We are to be living out in our relationship with him. The kingdom was supposed to do that way as they waited for this great Prince of Peace that was going to come. That's hard for us because, you know, we have all sorts of twisted forms of justice at times. But there are times where things occur because, once again, the covenant is this. What are the two great commandments? So there ought to be times where we speak for justice on the first thing, and there ought to be times where we speak for justice on the second thing. We need to. We need to be able to do that. This last week, I was so angry at one point about a news story. So angry about this news story. So angry. So a black father who had an adopted daughter who was white was shopping in a Walmart. And a white woman accused him of kidnapping the child and tried to take the child from the cart, not once, not twice, 3 times, screaming bloody murder at this person. And then when his daughter really panicked and cried, and she actually got her out of the front of the cart, he punched her in the face. I thought he was gracious. He punched her in the face. He waited until the 3rd time. And then she said, I'm calling the police. He said, call the police. Call the police. And she was arrested. And then she said, she cried out for justice. This is not fair. He should be required to carry documentation at all times. That's his child. Now hear me. There are times when things are wrong that the body of Christ needs to speak out against. And I'll tell you utmost, it irks me when I hear occasionally people in our community and they speak out. So in our community, I hear people speak out against Ukrainians, and I hear people speak out against Russians. I hear people that speak out against Hispanics. I hear people that speak out against Asians, and I hear people who speak out against Africans. And I think there are times where I need to speak back. Hey, you're wrong. I get the fact anybody can be a jerk at times. Nobody's a jerk because of the color of their skin. Nobody's a jerk because of where they were born. And we need to speak out. And when it happens in a coffee shop, or it happens at Walmart, it happens there, we need to speak out for things that are right and things that are wrong. That's what it means to do justice. Now, perverted forms of justice, people that, then go by somebody's house because that person said something stupid, so, I'll go smash their windows or I'll go do this. Jesus expects his people to do justice. And what's it say? Love kindness. What's the next one? Do it humbly. And do it humbly. I believe that's one of the great challenges in the 21st century for the church. How do we do that? God, what does it look like for your church to champion justice while it walks in kindness and humility? Teach us that, because it's the calling that we have. It's our calling. Amen. All right. Continuing in Micah, that expectation that he has for us, that we're just doing that. He then will ultimately talk about a second return. He sees it all. He sees the whole thing. He sees the first coming very clearly. And then after he sees the first coming, and he sets it up this way because chronologically it's been like this. When you read the book of Micah, how I've preached this morning, that's exactly how he lays it out. That's why I think he wrote it late in his life, and it's like the summation of everything that he's preached. He then talks about the Messiah's ultimate return. And it's going to be first preceded by apostasy. He shares that. In chapter 7, his last chapter, he begins to share this. He says, the godly will have perished from the earth. There is no one upright among mankind. They all lie in wait for blood. Each hunts the other with a net. Wow. He's talking about now what it's going to be like before the second arrival, before the return. Much like how Jude in 2 Peter will point out the fact that it gets bad. Life on earth is ugly before he returns. It will be preceded by this great apostasy. Yet, despite the fact this great apostasy that will happen and hit all of mankind, God will remain the single hope. But as for me, I love this statement, but as for me, I will look to the Lord. I will wait for the God of my salvation, and my God will hear me. Micah, the minor prophet who champions the coming Prince of Peace. So, what are the glimpses of Jesus in Micah? Actually, I've kind of used that word on the other ones. There are glimpses in the other ones. There's not glimpses in the book of Micah. There's no glimpses in the book of Micah. Micah is very different. He's championing the coming Prince of Peace who will establish his kingdom of righteousness and judgment, and that is at the heart of the book of Micah. So, what are some of the lessons for us as a church, as a body, as people, looking at the book of Micah? The first one is this. I think we have to remember that Micah teaches that living justly, loving mercy, following the Lord are more important than sacrifices and offerings. Hear it. Living justly, loving mercy, following the Lord, more important than sacrifices and offerings. Sunday worship is great. Live justly this next week. Live reflecting his presence in your neighborhood, at work, the store. Doing that, first lesson. Second, for Micah, leaders, rulers, prophets, and priests are to uphold justice. His charge against them is that they didn't. They would preach anything they wanted for money. There are times they got to speak out. Got to speak out about certain things. Got to speak out about what's right, not right. Micah challenges us with the two greatest commandments, to love God and to love others. It's huge. He reminds us that that's the broken covenant that the people are held against. They goofed up the first part of it, loving God. They goofed up the second part of it, loving your neighbor as yourself. And God held them accountable. Held them accountable for that. God held Israel accountable for how they showed love to others. So here's my question to you at the close of this message. So what will you do this week to actively demonstrate God's love to those around you? Because that was part of what they missed the vote on. We're to love, that's an active word, our neighbor as ourselves. That's the whole second half of the commandments. How do we do that? You'd be great. Okay, I didn't kill anybody this week, so I love my neighbor. Yeah, I get that. Good. But how do you actively do it? Because Jesus stated it in the positive, whereas the Ten Commandments stated it mainly in the negative. How will you love your neighbor? Second, ask yourself this question: what idols slip into your life, drawing you away from God and your first love? I got to wrestle with that because throughout the course of my life, it's easy for me to have other idols. I mean, idols are things like how much I used to love to go play basketball. I mean, I love to play good basketball, and I wrestled. Did I love God as much as I love to go play basketball, or whatever the case may be? Here's one for you: sports. Here's one for you: TV or internet gaming or shopping or whatever it is. Are there right now little things that slip into your life that have become your sense of false hope, false security, draw you away from your first love? Family, relationships, TV shows, sports. Is it a habit or an addiction? Sometimes they do the same thing. Micah is a great book that points us to a great Redeemer that's coming. We celebrate that. It is all about the one who comes, who is worthy of all honor and all praise. We lifted his name in worship this morning, and I want to close in worship of the one, the only one, the highest name. So if the worship team will come back, I want to lift our hands to that. Micah, frown, whenever you read that book, you hear that, you're going to hear Star Wars, aren't you? You'll hear John Williams' theme song for the rest of your life right there. Amen.